From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Don't like the way your town's school district is operating? Why not vote to shut it down? It's a new move being tried in one Kansas county. Plus, Wichitans are calling it blatant environmental injustice after learning a chemical spill the KDHE didn't tell them about for decades probably led to increased cancer rates. But first, here are tax, there are tax. How about a tax cut? The plans for your money some hope will change the landscape at the State House. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. With the 2023 legislative session wrapped up, we think Republican leaders are looking ahead to next year. On the top of their list, your taxes. As Rebecca Chung of the KSN Capitol Bureau shows us, it could play a big role in the Kansas elections next year.
Well, tax cuts will most likely be a focus for lawmakers here next session. And according to political experts, it could also be a make or break for next year's election. Kansas Republicans are promising to bring back a major tax package next year.
Will it be exactly the same? We don't know that until it comes out, but we will do probably a tax plan that mirrors it a lot.
This year, Republicans failed to pass a tax package which was expected to cost more than $1 billion over the next 3 years and included a flat income tax rate. It missed a few key votes from some Republican lawmakers in the end, but that could change next year.
While some Republicans were very upset they did not get the tax cut package this year, in some ways they may benefit even more by getting it passed in 2024. And there may be some Republicans who didn't vote for it who said, I'm likely to vote for it next year during an election year.
Kansas lawmakers also have a lot more money to spend in 2024. The state's budget is trending up. We spoke with the state budget director about potential tax cuts.
It's got to be sustainable. It's got to be targeted at those that need it the most. We do assume moderate growth over the next couple of years. We also assume just moderate growth on the cost side as well, knowing things do tend to cost a little bit more over time. So making sure that we can keep that balance where revenues are on top of expenditures going forward is really key.
And on the final day of session last month, it was predicted that lawmakers would have about $2.6 billion to spend come January. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And joining us this week to talk about taxes and a lot of other things, we have State Representatives Tom Kessler, a Wichita Republican, and John Carmichael, a Wichita Democrat. And here by Zoom, Dr. Elizabeth Von Nami, a political scientist with UMKC. And Beth, I've got you out there, so I'm going to start with you. As we look at this issue, they talked about the impact it could have on the elections next year. Is that something that you see this? Because, I don't see anything more than a repeat of the fight we had this year over tax cuts.
Right. I think flat taxes have generally existed in a dozen states. They've been popular in Republican circles for 30 plus years. So I would assume that it would be popular among Kansas Republicans. But unless the votes are there, as the story alluded to, there's some votes among Republican legislators that didn't come out this time around. I don't see how it changes much in terms of the fight. But if it does, if they're successful in achieving those tax cuts, then I think they see that as an election boon for them.
So you guys are on the House floor in the debates talking about all of this. What do you think? Do you see a difference between this year's debate and what may be coming next year? Majority party, I'm going to start with you, Tom.
Thank you. Well, obviously there's a high level of disappointment from not getting the tax package passed, regardless of what was in it. We have a record surplus of money in our bank right now, and we really need to find ways to sustainably give that back to the people. And so especially now, this is when really people really need the money through fighting through the inflation for the last year and a half, 2 years. But yes, I suspect that it'll probably will be similar to what our previous tax bill was, with a few tweaks and changes. But once again, that'll be up to leadership to start making those decisions.
Now, the first time you've been through this debate, John, what do you think?
What is so different now, though, than 10 years ago? We're not insolvent. We're not worrying about our checks clearing the bank. We've exercised a great deal of fiscal restraint. We've also experienced a rapidly growing economy, particularly in Kansas, and I give the governor credit for a lot of those things. But of course, we're going to see tax cuts next year. It's an election year. People always in politics give out tax cuts, but we can afford to do them. The question is, how do we do it? The governor, for example, wanted to end the food sales tax July 1. The Republican leadership was not willing to agree to that. All of us wanted to see some reductions in the income tax across the board, but also in particular for those who need the help the most. The argument wasn't about whether, but how. What percentage? Do we continue to have rich people paying a higher percentage and poor people paying a lower percentage? Or do we implement what was described as a flat tax, which lowered the tax rate for rich people, but raised the tax rate for poor people? I think we'll work those decisions out because I think the taxpayers and the voters will expect us to do it. And if we don't, there will be heck to pay in the November election.
Definitely.
But by raising the standard deduction on that, I mean, I think every single Kansas taxpayer receives some sort of a cut under a single rate. So I think every single taxpayer receives some sort of benefit from that.
Without sticking on this too long, though, the question was the magnitude of the cut. A
Oh,
few
yeah.
bucks for poor people, thousands or hundreds of thousands for more wealthy people. That's where, and we'll find common ground. If you put Tom and me in a room, we'd probably have this settled by tomorrow afternoon.
Problem is, there's 163 other people we got to talk to.
And some of them are called leadership.
And Beth, I want to bring something up with you as well. They mentioned the fact that we do have a surplus in Kansas right now, and they expect that to continue. And yet at the same time, this last month, for the first time in months, in a couple of years actually, we did not make the estimate for income coming in from taxes. Is that something that we should be paying attention to? Kind of a signal that maybe things aren't as financially stable as they seem?
Yeah, I think that's one of the concerns that come from economists on any sort of tax cuts in an election year or not, is that the revenues have to be keeping pace, and we can find ourselves sort of tax cutting our way into an economic problem for the state. And so I think there does have to be some caution in terms of what those tax cuts look like if we're going to actually move forward with them. Is 1.3 billion the way to go? Maybe it's 1.1 billion. Doesn't sound like a big difference, but for a situation like state revenues, that can be a huge difference. So I think some caution is probably needed given the economic situation in the country as a whole.
All right, well, turning to Northeast Wichita, Wichitans there want more information now after a KDHE study shows they could be at higher risk for some diseases. The study covered the area around 29th and Grove where a cancer-causing chemical was found in the groundwater. Cakes Jackson Overstreet shows us what those who live in the area want now.
It's something that we should have been aware of a long time ago.
Why didn't we hear about it before?
They are talking about the 29th and Grove contamination site. The Kansas Department of Health says this swath of land along Grove Street in Northeast Wichita has a high amount of a cancer-causing chemical in the groundwater after a spill sometime in the 70s or 80s at the Union Pacific Rail Yard. The site didn't become widely known to the public until fall of 2022.
This is a blatant environmental injustice.
The KDHE put out a study last week showing the potential effects of living in this area. Data show double the state rate for liver cancer for black men living in the area, as well as a higher rate of low infant birth weights.
How badly could I be affected? Is it affecting trees in the neighborhood? Because we've always had fruit trees. So we ate off of those fruit trees, most of my life.
Residents are wanting the KDHE to do more studies of the area. The last one tracked cancer rates only from 2009 to 2019 and birth weights from 2000 to 2021.
I think we all should be checked if we need to, if we have some symptoms or something.
Ajane Bennett lives in the area and has spearheaded a lot of the information campaign on the site. She says the KDHE study confirmed a lot of what she thought, but there's still more to do to make sure people are healthy.
The steps they're taking now, they should have taken 30 years ago. It's very frustrating to be born here, raised here, have a business here, have invested into this community my entire life, and it almost feels like a betrayal.
And certainly requests for more studies, more action. That costs money.
Of course it does. There are multiple locations in Sedgwick County where there is groundwater contamination. When I was on the Environment Committee, it's now the Energy and Utilities Committee, which I'm still on, I undertook a lot of research myself, looking at multiple sites in the urban core of Wichita, which have various types of contamination. What is so striking about this is a major plume. It's been there for 30 years or more, and apparently the type of study that we just have seen, the preliminary study actually, has not been done there. And the question is why? Who dropped the ball? I don't know. Is it the city? Is it Kansas Department of Health and Environment? Is it the railroad? Is it the EPA? No matter who's responsible, we've got to continue with the survey to make sure that what appears to be a very strong correlation does represent causation. And with these higher values, I fear that's the case, then number one, we got to remediate the problem, which is expensive and take time, but we've also got to track down the people who are exposed and make sure that they get evaluation, treatment if necessary. This is a major circumstance, but I fear it's not the only place where we may find the same types of things. 53rd and North Broadway would be an example.
Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a horrible, horrible event. I mean, something that took place that long ago, and we're just now finding out about it. People have health issues because of this. This is absolutely horrible. I agree with John on this, that we need to find where the responsibility lies and how do we fix it, and definitely need to have something in there in place to let the citizens know and yeah, at least the potential dangers of that.
And this isn't a partisan issue at all. This has been there long enough that everybody bears some responsibility for not doing anything about this far, far sooner.
Absolutely horrible.
Talking about bearing responsibility, Beth, this is something where some folks have said it's almost criminal the way things have gone down and the lack of action to date. But we're also talking about government, state agencies. How do those two things fit together?
Well, I think you're talking about sort of state agencies, local agencies, local governments, but also sort of private corporations. And I think there's obviously when the panelists talk about responsibility, I think they're right. There's responsibility to go around, right? There's plenty of blame to go around, and the residents have a right and, you know, a legitimate case to be frustrated, dismayed, scared of the situation and what could befall them. So I think it's really heartbreaking that this has been known for 30 plus years and nothing was done to address it. And I think it's time, and hopefully these studies will help with that.
Quickly, the Environmental Protection Agency also bears fault here. We've had the 21st Street Johns Sludge Pond. We've had the Gilbert and Mosley project. We've had a number of these things where they could have become or were EPA Superfund sites. But why not this location? Somebody dropped the ball in a very serious way, and I think the fault is over multiple agencies, many years, private corporations, public responsibility. We've got to figure out ways not ever to let this happen again and do what we can to remediate what's already happened.
Does that remediation perhaps include some sort of financial remediation for families who've lost members?
Well, the answer to that's certainly. If it can be proven that there was a cause and effect relationship between death or injury to people who lived in this area, then the responsible parties are going to bear responsibility through the civil justice system. And that was part of what happened in the Gilbert and Mosley project. We didn't have injury to people, but we indemnified property owners and then went after the responsible parties, even though the contamination actually occurred 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So this story, this circumstance is going to be with us for several more years.
Along with future screenings and health detections.
Agreed.
For, you know, that hasn't maybe happened yet, but the people that have been living there have been eating the vegetables and drinking the well water and whatever else, what they're doing with that. It's, yeah, there should be some more screening going on too to help these people with potential issues coming down the road.
Yeah, All right. Well, one other issue that we do have to talk about, there's been a lot of talk this year about parents taking control of their children's schools. In one district, they're trying to do just that, sort of. Cake's Jackson Overstreet shows us how parents upset with plans to close the local junior high are now trying to close the entire district, and a move that's setting precedents across the state.
If you drive through the central Kansas town of Wilson, one of the first things you'll notice is the giant check egg for which the town is known. But right down the road is the city's schools, K through 12, all in one building.
We have a great community that supports the kids from daycare, preschool, all the way up, after school programs.
But July 1st, that will change. Back in January, the school board covering Wilson's district, USD 112, voted to shut down the junior and senior high school.
Motion passes 5-2.
The closure would leave Wilson with just its elementary school left. Now, residents do say they'd be okay with the high school closing if they were given a fair reason, but they say so far the board hasn't done that.
But we're not hearing that sort of rhetoric from them. In fact, all we get is silence.
To try to save their school, several residents filed a petition with the state to disorganize USD 112. The move would have the State Board of Education come in and choose which district each school in USD 112 and its students would be moved into, allowing another board to potentially choose Wilson's fate.
This district is geographically challenged. That is a hardship.
The Kansas Department of Education tells Cake it could not find any record of disorganization via a public vote in its history. The vote over USD 112 would not be held until after the school closure date in July. So residents are also looking to file an injunction to give them more time.
The patrons are filing a petition against the school board saying that this has not been done fairly and this is our only voice.
In Wilson, Jackson Overstreet, Cake News on your side.
And I'm going to start, Beth, with you. One thing I think that really sticks out about this to me is we can have parents petition to disorganize a school district, but Kansas voters can't petition to get a law change like they can in, say, Missouri.
Yeah, it's remarkable, actually. There's so much variation across the states and even within states on what residents, voters are allowed to do. But it's remarkable. I think the concern or the interesting piece of the story here is that we have school districts dissolved, all the time. I shouldn't say all the time, but it happens on occasion. But it's almost always for financial reasons, and it's almost always done by the school district itself or by the state. It's almost never done by petition, as your story indicated. It's not just Kansas that's rare. It's rare nationwide for a petition to lead to any sort of dissolution of a school district.
Talking about the financial, what role do you guys think school funding legislation plays in all of this? There was a bill that you guys debated and voted on this year that would have directly impacted the Wilson School District because it dealt with buildings and how the district could benefit from buildings even after closing them.
Yeah, disposition of closed school buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what it basically says is the state has a right of first refusal to purchase those buildings. The issue that we're talking about in part is school consolidation, because in many instances that's occurring because of depopulation, if you will, or declining population in rural areas of the state. I think this may be a little bit different circumstance here. This sounds in many ways more like one portion of the district has the votes on the school board to take care of the high school in one location, and the people in Wilson feel like that they're not being fairly treated and being left out. I don't know a lot about the specifics of this beyond what Jackson's story is, but we have to realize that we're going to have to continue to fund rural school districts. And one of the things in the school funding bill that lies on the governor's desk right now is perhaps as many as 100 school districts are going to lose funding because of changes that are in that bill. We'll see what the governor does with it. Now, if you want to talk about initiative and referendum, then we could talk about why marijuana is not legal in Kansas. Because if we had it, it probably would be.
It's not the only thing that would be different.
That's true.
So on the school district, it sounds like there's a big communication breakdown, kind of like John was alluding to. So I don't know that I don't know what the favorable outcome for the residents of Wilson is on that issue. I don't know enough about it to really go there, but when the state school board gets a hold of it, I mean, there's no guarantees they're going to like the outcome of that either. I mean, they can close those buildings, both of those, or the way they have to divide up with northern counties taking some of the northern people and the southern people and the western people, and it still may not be a very favorable outcome. So I don't know what the end game is there as far as, I understand them being outraged, I get that part, but I wish them all the best, that's for sure.
Yeah. Fair to say there's a reason why this is a rare maneuver.
Yeah, correct. I don't know that this has ever happened.
I'm not familiar with it happening by petition. There have been voluntary consolidations of school districts. The phrase has always been consolidation of school districts is the third rail of the Kansas legislature. You don't want to touch it as a politician because you'll get burned. But we can see the effects. Things like this are going to happen unless we can somehow maintain population in Kansas and rural areas. So it's a difficult and ongoing problem.
All right. Well, moving on, Barton County residents want tougher rules there controlling solar farms. This comes amidst anger over plans for a solar farm they say would hurt wildlife in Cheyenne Bottoms. We go back to Jackson Overstreet.
Even amidst a drought, if you ask some Barton County residents their thoughts on Cheyenne Bottoms, they'll rave about the wildlife area.
Real special. It's one of the most special places.
If there's a sacred place in Kansas, this is it.
That's why these two and others are concerned over potential development south of the area. A Spanish company, Accionia, wants to build a more than $300 million solar farm on land between Cheyenne Bottoms and Great Bend.
Nobody is against green energy, not in this spot. This spot is the worst idea they could possibly come up with.
Wednesday morning, the Barton County Commission voted to send a zoning change back to the Planning Commission that would have required any solar farms to be built at least 6 miles from Cheyenne Bottoms. It also passed a moratorium on solar projects in the county until the end of the year.
Put everything on pause for a while so they can decide if the current rules are good or if they want to amend them or revise them or things along that nature, and also give the chance for landowners and proponents and opponents to look into this and give their opinion.
Residents say they would want the project to be at least 10 miles back and more east or west of Cheyenne Bottoms so it doesn't disrupt any bird's flight path.
The concern is these solar panels, they have a lake effect. They look like water and birds want to land on them. Or sometimes it's like a mirror. I have a picture window and I have birds fly into it all the time.
Some interesting points there. Also looking at this, they're using zoning to control the issue. Really kind of an old technique for newer issues. We've seen this also with wind farms.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I understand the residents. I mean, we've had this conversation many times. Everybody is for green energy, just like he had commented, except not near me. Right? So I mean, that happens a lot. So there should be some communications there, them getting together and kind of working this out. Now, I do understand their problems with being in the Cheyenne Bottoms. It is a big watershed. It is smack dab in the middle of one of our flight patterns, right, for migratory birds, and I understand that. But I'm not sure that 10 miles away is going to fix that problem. I mean, that's a pretty wide path, but I do understand. I do understand where they're coming from on that.
Yeah.
Been on the Energy Committee 10 years. This is the first time that I've heard of problems with solar farms attracting migratory birds and a bad result. We learn more about this every day, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I think what the commissioners are doing is reasonable. Let's put a moratorium in effect. Let's get the real facts, the real data. Let's get additional information. And if they need to implement zoning in a way that protects a statewide natural resource and an economic center for Barton County in the bottoms, then that's what they're going to do. That's the exemplification of local control, and I hope they're successful in, frankly, finding an alternative location.
All right. Well, finally today, a former state lawmaker is headed to prison. A federal judge this week sentenced former state representative Michael Capps to 27 months behind bars. Judge Eric Milgren said in his 15-some years on the bench, he could count on one hand the number of cases he's handled that make him think so much of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. During Thursday's sentencing hearing, Michael Kapp's defense attorney asked the judge for 0 time in prison, citing Kapp's years of charity work, the adoption of his son, and his military service. The prosecution, however, said Kapp should get the maximum sentence because he's committed the maximum crime and never shown any remorse or taken responsibility for his actions. Last December, a jury convicted Kapp of 12 counts of bank fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering for applying for paycheck protection loans and emergency operation loans from the federal government during the pandemic to pay employees he didn't have. The judge split the difference, saying he had to take both Kapp's violation of the public trust as a business owner and a legislator, as well as the good he's done for the community throughout his life, into account. In the end, he gave him a 27-month prison term, plus 2 years supervised release. And Beth, I'm going to come to you here on this. Prison time, not unexpected in this case, but a lot of folks really hoping for a longer sentence than he got. Perhaps the anger simply because of the nature of this crime involving those COVID relief funds.
Yeah, I think it's a two-part. I mean, I think it's the funds themselves, but I think it's also the calculating and sort of premeditated nature. I think that gets people their ire up more than just sort of like, I accidentally committed fraud. I don't know. That's a thing. But I do think sort of that over time sort of nature of it makes people more concerned about it being a longer sentence for him.
Yeah. And you guys, I know, John, you worked with Kapp in the legislature. I know there's a lot of anger amongst lawmakers about all of this. And this is not the only case of a lawmaker who is in legal trouble this session alone.
Yeah, you know, legislators don't pick our colleagues. They are elected by their constituents, and sometimes it's hard to judge somebody's character in a political campaign. And sometimes people get into public office who simply should not have been there. And I hope that Judge Milgren's sentence will be a strong warning that those who go into public office may pay a more severe price if they do things like this.
All right.
Yep.
And we're going to have to let that be the last word tonight. I'm sorry, Tom, we are out of time. Thanks again to both of you, as well as you, Beth, for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. We'd also like to thank our news partners at Cake News, KSN News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to hear your ideas for future shows. Just send us an email at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, stay safe and have a great week.